Didn't even have to ask you, Emily, and you caught us up on the story of Mary, so I appreciate that. You might be a Presbyterian if your definition of fellowship includes food. We like to get together and eat, but a study of the Confessions doesn't really draw many takers. Although it's, a little bit nerdy, but there's some good stuff in there. I asked a person once, I was talking to them and I said, "How come I never see you at church anymore?" And the young man replied, "Well, preacher, there are just too many hypocrites." So I responded, "Oh, you don't need to worry about that. There's always room for one more." And if I had $1 for every time I heard that, I'd be pretty rich right now. I'd give Donald Trump a run for his money, so. But we hear that a lot, and if any of y'all know people, that's a common excuse. We don't want to go to church, we don't want to be part of a church institution or community because they're just a bunch of hypocrites. Well, I don't necessarily disagree with them. Christians are a messy bunch of people. It is sad that so many are hurt by people of the church. But we are sinful and flawed human beings just like anyone else. Yet God calls each and every one of us into fellowship, which is imperfect life together as community. So as I alluded to earlier, many want to dismiss church because there are a bunch of sinful hypocrites talking about loving kindness. Yet in reality, they often are a bunch of jerks. I think this only makes the church more real. I don't think this is necessarily a bad thing. The disciples themselves had plenty of struggles, and they often did not get it. They had Jesus right there with them, and they still did things wrong. Churchgoers are not perfect, and never will be. So if you are lost, lonely, broken, hurting, disillusioned, confused, or doubting, join the club. You're in good company here. Allow me to explain. Christ's closest companions, those who are with them day in and day out, miss the point of Jesus' ministry. They heard him tell them time and again that he would suffer, die, and rise again. Yet they lose hope when he is arrested and killed. Like they didn't see that coming. Even though Jesus tries, and we have it recorded in all 4 Gospels, that multiple times Jesus tried to let them know that this was going to happen. The Gospel of John gives us some wonderful examples of this flawed fellowship of disciples. So first, Jesus appears to a woman of all people. This was not a good cultural choice, since they did not count as a true witness in a court of law. Not that we agree with that stance, and thankfully we've moved on a little bit since then in our treatment of women, but this was not a move that would give momentum to the Jesus movement. And that's not to mention that Mary, whether it was fair or not, has a dubious reputation, that maybe she was a lady of the night, or at the very least sinful in maybe some sexual ways. Yet Mary Magdalene loves Jesus and has followed him around faithfully. Yet in her grief she is talking to angels and then to Jesus himself without noticing that something profound and amazing is happening right before her. So I want y'all to imagine this. What if our own Jack Pruitt had a flame dancing above his head and he was speaking in tongues? Would we not immediately think that God was present and doing something amazing? Right? I mean, his East Texas accent is so thick, for him to be speaking another language fluently, we'd all be pretty amazed and impressed. No offense, buddy. All right, good. But that is how shocking and different it would have been to have two angels and the risen Lord speaking with Mary. And finally, when Jesus calls her by name, Mary comes out of her daze. She sees what is taking place around her as miraculous and divine. And once she gets it, she wants to cling on to Jesus. She doesn't want to let go, much like Peter when he builds or wants to build a house for the Lord and Elijah and Moses as they appeared before him. They don't want to let go of the moment, but they must. She is the one that is tasked with being sent out to tell the disciples the good news. Unfortunately, when she goes to tell the others, they believe she is speaking nonsense. These men, the disciples, believe that Mary, in her grief, has gone all hysterical. All these disciples are so scared that they are locked in a room even after Mary lets them know that Jesus is alive. She has given them her testimony. Yet these 10 are immobilized. And then Jesus appears before them. Seeing their fear, uncertainty, and doubt, Jesus offers them peace, not once, but twice. So you would think the followers of Jesus would be more courageous after learning from Jesus and seeing his power right before their eyes. These men have walked with Jesus until the end, seeing him bring people back to life, heal people of all their maladies, and perform miracles of multiplication. Now they are paralyzed with fear of what the world may do to them. This is not the most hopeful group to build a religious movement upon. And thankfully that's not what Jesus was wanting to do. And then, to make matters even worse, after seeing their risen Lord and experiencing him, the disciples are momentarily excited, but still they are locking themselves inside a room because their fear is so great. Thomas has heard their story about Jesus appearing miraculously before them, but he remains skeptical. He knows these guys need to get out of this room more, as he did, and he probably believes that them being locked up in the house is making them lose it. 10 people you trust having the same hallucination is pretty hard to believe. It doesn't really work that way. Unless they're all sharing the same drugs, but that's another story. Still, Thomas doubts that this can be true and demands to see some proof before he can believe their story of a resurrected Christ. This poor disciple in our tradition gets singled out by many in the church, and we know him as Doubting Thomas for his lack of faith. Yet he asked for nothing the first group did not get to see. And none of them believed their first witness, Mary, or any of the other women that might have seen Jesus appear. So they too were doubting. The most exciting event in human history has just taken place, and this flawed fellowship of believers is slow to catch on. They're not super Christians or even really good disciples. And neither are we as the church today. We are confused, scared, and doubting in our faith. Christians are hypocrites in the sense that we cannot live out what we teach and preach to its full extent. Of course, this judgment is unfair because a person of any faith or no faith at all would fall short of the values that they uphold as well. It is impossible for us to do as humans. But this is precisely the honesty and beauty of Christian fellowship that is displayed in most Christian communities. We profess that we are sinful and that we fall short of the glory of God, according to Romans. Yet we cannot let our lack of faith and impure living keep us from our mission. And our calling is to proclaim the risen Lord in word and by our actions. We can never undertake this mission with anything even close to perfection. Yet we work diligently to testify to our living God and uphold the best character that we are able to. Part of keeping our good character includes admitting when we are wrong and at fault. When we admit that we do not live up to our own moral standards, we position ourselves in a humble position to improve and acknowledge our own limitations. Sisters and brothers, I find it comforting that our risen Lord appears first to those who are deeply flawed. He doesn't appear to the wisest, richest, and most powerful after his own resurrection, but a bunch of scared and confused disciples. The Flawed Fellowship starts the Jesus movement. Followers of Jesus today still lack faith and are paralyzed by fear at times. Yet we still press on, sharing our love of God and our love for our neighbors. So it is normal for churches to be filled with people who are flawed and are struggling. It is precisely because we are sinful that we need God's forgiveness, that we desperately yearn for the grace of God. Grace is showered upon those who do not deserve it, including those who first followed Jesus in the beginning. Friends, as Easter people, we need to recognize how Christ is appearing to us in the here and now, and that God continues to break into our lives even though they are not as tidy as we would like them to be. God shows up after the resurrection, granting to the disciples, and now to each and every one of us, peace and hope to all who follow. So may we too be encouraged by that Spirit that Jesus breathes upon the disciples. That same Spirit moves through our fellowship of local believers here at First Presbyterian. So let us not be stuck as cowardly disciples, but let us be emboldened by the Spirit that Jesus freely gives to each and every one of us to proclaim what we have seen and heard in Jesus Christ, and share that message and love with all those we encounter. To our risen Lord be all the glory now and forevermore. Hallelujah.